Hello, and welcome to another micro training, this time on S3 Workbenches and Mounts. First, I'll discuss S3 Workbenches. S3 here refers to AWS S3, which simply put is basically just a big folder that you have access to in the cloud. That's really all it is. You can create, read, write, and store any file you want up in this S3 Workbench. And every org in our system has their own S3 Workbench location. So right here, I have defined a string, S3 colon slash slash, a bunch of numbers, CDR lakehouse object store prod, and then the name of your org will be here. This one is mine, slash workbench. Generally, if you know the abbreviation for your org, slotting it in right here should do the trick. But if it doesn't work, please ask somebody on your team who would know, and they should be able to come up with this S3 workbench location for you. All right, so I have stored this as a variable called S3 loc. And to view what is in your workbench location, you can use dbutils fsls. We're going to have another microtraining video on the dbutils library, but for now, the ls function will show you every file and folder in that location. The display here is optional, but shows it a little bit so it is easier to read. And here, as you can see, there is a bunch of stuff in this workbench. Now, of course, you don't want to just throw all of your files into one big location. Your workbench is going to have folders and subfolders, and you can use this ls function to help you navigate in here. So in here, I know that I have a -esimplicity / tim folder, and I'm going to ls the contents of this folder. And among many other things in here, I have a diamonds.csv file in here that I will use. Your S3 Workbench is for storing files of any type, not just structured data. All kinds of unstructured data can go in here too. As you can see, a JPEG, .log, .text, right? Any file can go in here. However, if you do find yourself creating many tables as you code, you probably don't want to be saving these in your S3 Workbench. You want to be saving them in your org's SQL schema. But that is a topic for another video, so we will proceed with reading and writing from our S3 Workbench. So here, I am going to read from my S3 Workbench as if it was any other file location. So I'm going to say spark read CSV, that big location up above, /-esimplicity /tim /diamonds.csv with header and infer schema. And you can see that it works just as if it was anywhere else. And here is the first 5 rows of that diamonds data set. Now, this is big, right? This huge file location and a bunch of subfolders here was arduous to type. As a little bit of a shortcut, we can mount this location to make it a little bit easier to access and be a little bit shorter. And that process is called mounting. So in order to mount, I am going to create a new string with my S3 location, but I have 2 important differences here. My first difference, which is actually mandatory, is to not use S3. I'm going to use S3A. It is exactly the same thing from our perspective. It is just a quirk as to how Amazon manages their products. We need to access it with an S3A. This is a very common mistake and very frustrating to solve if you don't know this trick, but you do just have to include an A here. The other thing I'm doing here is I'm adding one more subfolder deep on the end here. This was optional. I just know that I'm going to want everything from within the -esimplicity folder, so I'm going to mount from this location. Next to mount, you're going to use dbutils.fs.mount. You're going to say what is the S3 location you're going to mount from, and you're going to mount it onto this location. Here I have written /mnt/microtrain_demo. That microtrain demo folder did not exist before running this line of code. This is a new thing that is going to appear after I run it. And basically, anytime I want to refer to this long location, I instead just say /mnt/microtrain demo. Now, 2 important notes when creating this is this should be a unique location, and it's one that's going to be viewable by everybody else in our system. They won't be able to access it unless they have access to your org, but they will be able to see what you have named it. And that means that everybody's location is going into the same namespace. That's why it has to be unique. The second thing is make sure not to accidentally run just /mnt. It is a very common thing in our system to accidentally just run this as /mnt without giving a name, and that will mess things up for your fellow users, and somebody else will have to go in and fix that. So please make sure that you give it a name and that that name is unique. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to mount this location onto microtrain demo. And I believe it will return true when it is ready. And then I'm going to read exactly that same data set in again, but instead of saying my S3 bucket in that huge long string, I'm just going to say /mnt /microtrain demo /tim /diamonds.csv. And as you can see, it will just work. Okay, now let's say I've gone through my whole process. I've done everything I've wanted in this data set. I am now ready to be done for the day. I should now unmount my S3 workbench. This should not be considered an optional step. It is best practice to programmatically unmount your mount when your code is finished or at the end of the workday. The reason for this is because this will persist and will be viewable by everybody else. If we have a culture of not unmounting, this /mnt workspace is going to clog up the namespace of Databricks /mnt, and nobody wants to see a clogged up namespace. The other reason for this is that when you go to mount onto the same location, if that location is already being used by a mount, you will get an error. And it is good coding practice to have a notebook that will just run top to bottom without any expected errors. If you forget to unmount, it's going to be very annoying when you try to run a notebook that's going to take several minutes to run and then it just fails because you forgot to unmount the night before. So here I am, I'm going to unmount. Okay, so thank you for watching. This was a video on S3 workbenches and mounts. To summarize, in this video, we discussed the S3 workbench and when to use it and when not to use it. We also used this workbench to read and write data from Databricks. And you should have read, write, and delete access in Databricks. If you find that you are unable to delete things in Databricks, please submit a help desk ticket and somebody will be able to help you get the correct access. We also mounted our workbench to clean this process up using mounts. And then finally, we of course unmounted our workbench. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.